Why does history keep repeating itself? This question echoes through time, etched into the ruins of empires and whispered in the quiet of libraries. We see civilizations rise, reach amazing heights of glory and knowledge, only to crumble and fade away, leaving behind lessons that future generations seem doomed to ignore. Each new generation thinks it's wiser, more advanced, convinced it has avoided the pitfalls that brought down its ancestors. Yet, the same destructive patterns keep popping up again and again. Why does humanity always fall into the same traps? Is it a flaw built into who we are? A shared forgetfulness that makes us ignore the pains of the past? Or are there deeper forces, spiritual and moral cycles that control our destiny more than we want to admit? Pride, greed, the hunger for power, letting go of core values. These old problems just wear new masks in every age. We change the scenery, the technology, the clothes, but the play acted out on the stage of human history remains tragically the same. It's to explore these big questions that we exist. Welcome to JM Impact Plus. Here, we don't just tell stories, we try to find the timeless wisdom hidden within them. We believe the past isn't a dead land, but a rich field of lessons for our present and our future. So don't go anywhere. We invite you to stay until the end, because what we're about to discover together is much more than just a history lesson. It's a new adventure into what it means to be human. If this journey sounds interesting to you, please like this video, subscribe so you don't miss any of our explorations, and share it so this light can reach as many people as possible. Our journey begins at a major turning point in Israel's history, after Joshua, after the strong leader who, with faith and strategy, led the people to conquer the promised land. A big emptiness settles in. The generation of witnesses, those who had seen God's miracles in the desert and the taking of Jericho with their own eyes, starts to pass away. A chapter closes, and with it, the living memory of an amazing covenant and rescue. It's then that the people of Israel enter one of the darkest, most chaotic, and most troubled times in their history. The promise of rest in the land of Canaan seems to drift away, replaced by a reality of endless struggles, dangerous compromises, and a slow spiritual decline. The land that was supposed to be a safe haven becomes a crucible of suffering, a stage for internal and external conflicts. This was a time without a king. There was no central power, no unifying figure to guide the nation, to keep justice, and to remind the people of their divine purpose. The tabernacle, the center of worship, existed, but its influence seemed far away. Leadership was broken up, local, and often just not there. This emptiness at the top of the government created instability that would spread throughout society. It was an era without clear direction. The nation's moral compass, the law of Moses, wasn't lost, but it was increasingly ignored. The new generations, born into the relative prosperity of the Promised Land, didn't have the same passion as their parents. They were tempted by the religions of neighboring peoples, drawn in by their idols and practices. The path laid out by God became blurry, just one path among many, and no longer the only one. This was a time when everyone did what they thought was right. This sentence, which ends the book, is actually its main point. It describes a society falling apart, where individualism and moral relativism ruled. When there's no longer an absolute standard, when personal conscience becomes the only judge, chaos is unavoidable. Justice becomes unfair, compassion disappears in the face of selfishness, and violence becomes an acceptable way to settle disagreements. It's spiritual, moral, and social anarchy. This dark picture sets the stage for a biblical book of striking power and relevance. Welcome to the Book of Judges. At the heart of the Book of Judges is a powerful story structure, a pattern that repeats with tragic regularity, It's not just a series of events, but a deep look at what it means to be human and a revelation of God's never-ending patience. This cycle, often called the Judge's Spiral, is broken down into 7 clear steps that show the up and down relationship between Israel and its God. Understanding this cycle is key to understanding the book's main message. It all starts with a time of faithfulness and blessings. The first step is 1. The people serve God. After God steps in, whether it's the first conquest under Joshua or being saved by a judge, the people have a time of peace and worship. The memory of God's miracles is fresh. The fields are rich, families are safe, and the nation does well under the agreement with God. During this time, the Israelites live by the rules of the Torah. They worship only the Lord, and the land is at rest. It's a perfect picture of what life could be like under God's rule, a life filled with order, thanks, and togetherness. But this peace, as sweet as it is, holds the seeds of its own destruction. Good times often lead to people getting too comfortable. A new generation comes along, one that hasn't personally experienced slavery or being set free. For them, the stories of the Exodus and the conquest are old tales, not something they lived through. That's when the second step begins. 2. They forget God. Forgetting isn't a sudden act, but a slow wearing away of memory and belief. The rules that seemed so important to their parents become burdens. The appeal of the surrounding cultures, with their more touchable gods and more relaxed rituals, becomes too strong to resist. Material comfort takes the place of spiritual reliance. They start to think their peace and good fortune come from their own efforts, not as a gift from God. This forgetting is a basic betrayal of the covenant, a spiritual amnesia that sets the stage for a deeper fall. Once God is forgotten, the moral boundaries fall apart. The people without their spiritual anchor naturally drift towards doing wrong. The third step is a direct result of the second. 3. They fall into sin. This sin takes 2 main forms. First, idol worship. The Israelites turn to the Baals and Astartes, the gods of fertility and power of the Canaanites, hoping to guarantee their harvests and success. They build altars on high places and bow down to idols made of wood and stone. Second, social unfairness and moral decay. Without God's law as a guide, society breaks down. Selfishness, violence, and bad behavior, as shockingly seen at the end of the book, become common. They do what seemed right in their own eyes, a phrase that becomes the terrible theme of spiritual and social chaos. The agreement God made with Israel included blessings for obeying, but also curses for disobeying. By abandoning God, Israel willingly gave up his protection. The fourth step is the painful result of their sin. 4. They are oppressed. God, in his fairness, takes away his protective hand and allows neighboring nations, the Moabites, the Canaanites, the Midianites, the Philistines, to become tools for correction. These oppressors steal crops, take livestock, and enslave the people. Good times turn into poverty, safety into constant fear. The promised land, once a safe haven, becomes a prison of suffering. This oppression isn't just random punishment. It's meant to wake the people up from their spiritual sleep, to make them realize how foolish it was to abandon God. Cornered, stripped of everything, the Israelites finally understand that their idols are powerless to save them. In their desperation, they finally remember the only one who can deliver them. This is the turning point of the cycle, the fifth step. 5. They cry out to God. This cry isn't always deep and true regret. Often it's a groan of pain, a plea for help driven by suffering more than a real change of heart. Yet, even this imperfect cry is enough. It shows a basic truth. Deep in their misery, they realize that only the Lord is their true hope. It's an act of forced humility, an admission that their own path led them to ruin. And God, in his endless mercy, hears that cry. Despite his people's repeated unfaithfulness, his compassion wins over his anger. The sixth step reveals God's heart. 6. God sends a deliverer. This deliverer or judge isn't a king, but a special leader raised up by God's Spirit for a specific job. These judges are often unlikely characters: a left-handed man like Ehud, a woman like Deborah, a fearful farmer like Gideon, or a hot-headed and morally questionable man like Samson. Their variety and their flaws highlight that the power to deliver doesn't come from them, but from God working through them. They gather the people, face the oppressor, and by God's power win the victory. After the victory, the enemy is defeated and peace is restored. This is the seventh and final step of the cycle. 7. Peace returns temporarily. The land rests again, sometimes for 40 years, sometimes even 80. The people are thankful, the judge rules wisely, and the cycle seems broken. The prosperity and safety of the first step return. But the key word here is temporarily. Because as long as the people's hearts don't fundamentally change, this peace is fragile. The book of Judges itself sums up this sad pattern. Whenever the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge, and he saved them from the hand of their enemies throughout the lifetime of the judge, for the Lord had pity on their groaning. But after the judge died, they would again act more corruptly than their fathers, going after other gods to serve them and bow down to them. The cycle starts again, often even worse than before. This downward spiral isn't just the story of an old nation. It's a mirror held up to all of humanity. It's not just Israel's story. It's the story of the human heart, a heart prone to forgetting, to going astray, but constantly sought after by a God whose mercy refuses to give up on it. The main verse from the book of Judges says, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes." When God is no longer in charge, values fall apart, confusion takes over, violence goes up, and people lose who they are. Israel's real problem wasn't the enemy outside. It was forgetting what was important on the inside. In the middle of this cycle of sin and rescue, God raised up some amazing people, the judges. It's really important to get that these men and women weren't kings like we think of them, or perfect saints sitting on a fancy throne. They were special leaders, army commanders, and rescuers chosen by God's Spirit for a specific job at a specific time. What they all had in common wasn't that they were perfect, far from it. It was that they were willing to be used by God, even with all their weaknesses, doubts, and mistakes. The book of Judges is like a picture gallery of very human, imperfect people, yet chosen by a perfect God to do his plans. This might be one of the most powerful and encouraging lessons from this book. God's ability to use someone doesn't depend on how good we are, but on his power working through our weaknesses. Let's look at 3 of these famous people to really get this truth. First up, Deborah. In a society where men were usually in charge and a woman's voice didn't count for much in public or in the military, God chose a woman to lead his people. Deborah wasn't just a prophet who shared God's messages. She was the top judge in Israel, the one people went to when they had problems. Her power didn't come from her family or from being elected, but directly from God. When King Jabin of Canaan and his general Sisera, with his 900 iron chariots, were really oppressing Israel, everyone was terrified. The roads were empty, and fear had taken over the nation. That's when God spoke through Deborah. She calls Barak, the army leader, and tells him God's command to go to war. Barak's answer shows us how spiritually weak Israel was at the time. "If you go with me, I will go, but if you don't go with me, I won't go." He put his trust not in God's promise, but in the visible presence of his prophet. Deborah agrees, but she says that he won't get the credit for the victory because the Lord will hand Sisera over to a woman. Deborah's choice is God's way of saying, God uses whoever he wants, whenever he wants, ignoring human rules to show that victory and glory belong entirely to him. Next, Gideon. If Deborah broke down gender barriers, Gideon shows us the fight against fear and self-doubt. We meet him in a scene that just screams fear. The Midianites were ruining the crops, so Gideon wasn't threshing his wheat out in the open. Instead, he was doing it secretly in a wine press, a small, awkward place to hide from the enemy. This is a perfect picture of how small and scared he felt. Yet it's to this man, huddled in his hiding spot, that the angel of the Lord appears. And the divine greeting is shocking, almost funny. The Lord is with you, mighty warrior. God isn't talking about the man he is right then, but the man he will become through God's power. He sees the warrior where the man only sees his weakness. The rest of the story is a long talk where God, with endless patience, answers Gideon's doubts, asking for sign after sign. The fleece dry on wet ground, then wet on dry ground. God lowers himself to Gideon's weak faith to make it stronger. Then he cuts down Gideon's army from 32,000 men to just 300. So it's super clear that the victory wouldn't come from having a lot of people, but from God's hand. Gideon, the scaredy cat, becomes Gideon, the divine strategist who defeats a huge army with torches, jars, and trumpets. Finally, Samson. His story is like a sad play, a strong warning about having a gift but no self-control. Set apart for God from birth as a Nazirite, he got amazing physical strength. He tore a lion apart with his bare hands, killed 1,000 Philistines with a donkey's jawbone, and ripped out city gates. He was God's ultimate weapon against Israel's worst enemy. But this huge physical strength lived alongside a huge moral weakness. Samson was controlled by his urges, his desires, his pride. He constantly broke his Nazirite vows, touching a dead body, drinking wine, and worst of all, telling the secret of his strength to a woman who betrayed him. His fall was huge. The unbeatable hero became a blind slave, grinding grain in a Philistine prison, an object of ridicule. His story shouts to us that God's gift, no matter how amazing, doesn't excuse us from being responsible, honest, and obedient. But even in his sad end, God's grace worked one last time. In a final act of saying sorry and praying, Samson asks God to give him his strength one last time, not for his own revenge, but to finish his job as a judge. As he died, he killed more Philistines than he had in his whole life. Deborah, Gideon, Samson, a brave prophet, a scared farmer, an impulsive strong man. The message is loud and clear. God doesn't call those who are perfect, he perfects those he calls. He works powerfully, not because his tools are perfect, but very often, despite their obvious flaws, so that all the glory goes to him, and him alone. God isn't just looking for temporary obedience, he's looking for a changed heart. Every fall reveals something, a shallow dependence, faith that isn't rooted, a deep need for repentance. Restoration without transformation always leads to another fall. The Book of Judges teaches us, freedom without God becomes slavery. Repentance always opens the door to restoration. God never abandons a repentant people. Cycles stop when God becomes king of the heart. God's grace is stronger than our relapses. As long as you cry out to God, he answers. It's not the fall that defines you. It's who you turn to after the fall. Israel falls. Israel cries out. God answers. And even today, God is ready to restore. Like and subscribe for more of the Unknown Origins of Israel series.